Welcome to the Wall Street Lab podcast, where we interview top financial professionals and deconstruct their practices to give you an insider look into the world of finance.
First principles is really being able to break down the problem in a very simple way. And so where we have gaps today from a technical implementation perspective, or where we create problems for ourselves, is we tend to iterate on existing systems. So we call this design by analogy. So if you take a bank account, for example, right? How do we iterate or innovate around a bank account? Well, today what we do is we add additional channels so you can get access to your bank account through your phone or through the internet or, through an ATM or IVR system. But essentially the bank account itself hasn't changed. And so part of the reason we have some restrictions from a design perspective is internal bank policy. Part of it is the way the bank account and general ledger have been designed in the mainframe system and the limitations around that. And part of it is just simply the way banks have classified a bank account as a product that customers will buy from a bank rather than thinking about how people use their money. So a first principles approach to the problem of designing a bank account, you start with, what do people use money for? How do they use it in their daily life? And is a bank account that we have today designed to augment that or, improve the way you use your money? And so if we look at sort of the basic requirements of a bank account, what's the number one thing a bank account should do for a bank account holder, an individual? And I believe it should help you save money and it should help you manage money. But see, inherently, in a bank account that you get from a bank, when you walk into a branch, you sign a piece of paper and they give you this plastic debit card, it doesn't really help you save money and they don't give you any guidance on that. They might talk about interest rates, but to look at getting you to save money requires us to behave differently. And so a bank account would have to be sort of like a financial coach or something that helps us modify our behavior over time to be better with our money. And so this is actually the problem that a bank account should solve. So from a first principles engineering perspective, you sort of break it down to the constitute physics of what should a bank account achieve. And then you use technology that we have available today, such as artificial intelligence and data science and modeling and access to real-time technologies like smartphones. Use that, you incorporate that in the design of a bank account that lives with you, that is embedded in your life and helps you save money. It becomes very different from a way a banker thinks about a bank account itself, but from an engineering or design perspective, it makes that product or that service far more useful to the individual once you design it based on that premise. And so that's the leap in terms of design. A couple of other quick examples to illustrate first principles, right? Think about the car, the automobile. The automobile was a first principles rethink of personal transportation. At the time the automobile appeared, the most common form of personal transportation was a horse and coach or a horse and cart, or riding on a horse individually. And to translate from that to automobiles, we needed to sort of redesign cities and we need to think about, rules for cars on the road. And it was a big departure from the horse, but obviously, from a first principles perspective, it accomplished transportation for individuals better, safer, and faster, but also radically changed the transportation sector. The iPhone's another great example. Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive, they didn't take the Motorola Flip or the Nokia banana phone or the BlackBerry with its RIM keyboard and iterate on that. They essentially designed a new personal computing device with a multi-touch screen that also enabled you to access the internet and make phone calls. And that first principles rethinking of what a phone or a personal computing device in your pocket should be like meant that after the iPhone, every new mobile phone essentially had to look like an iPhone because they had changed the rules. So that's one of the benefits of first principles thinking is when you adopt that type of thinking and you do it effectively, you can change the paradigm with which your service fits in the world.
Disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast constitutes the opinions of individuals and should not be treated as investment, tax, financial, or legal advice. We take no responsibility for the accuracy of any statements made in this podcast. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and it does not contain an offer to sell or buy any sort of financial products, and should not be treated as advertisement for such. Any copying, distribution, or reproduction of this podcast without the prior permission of the creators of the podcast is strictly prohibited.